is with Reston for a Lifetime, who is a member of the Village to Village Network. And if you're not familiar with either of those, Scott's going to familiarize you with Reston for a Lifetime, but I'm going to make sure to drop both links to Reston for a Lifetime and Village to Village Network in chat there for everybody. But Scott, welcome and really charged up. Thanks again for partnering on this and getting a great panel member like Gary for us. I think I've got a slide deck for you to familiarize people a little bit with Reston for a Lifetime.
Well, thank you, Steve, and welcome everyone. This is the fourth webinar Reston for a Lifetime has done with Positive Aging Community in 2023. And while our mission is to educate and inform about how to age in place, this webinar series isn't Reston centered necessarily, and we hope this has been the kind of information we've been presenting is useful, informative, and has helped you understand a little bit about aging and aging in place wherever you live or work. How about the next slide, please?
Got it.
What is Reston for a Lifetime? Basically, what we do is we offer a robust website with hundreds of resources, mostly nonprofit and governmental, that can help somebody who lives in Reston or somebody whose parents or loved ones live in Reston and they live somewhere else, figure out what are the resources out there that can help me or someone I love age in place. In addition, we do in-person educational events, for example, at faith communities. And in 2024, we hope to do more of those and publish some aging in place planning workbooks that are the people who subscribe to our newsletter have said they want. Next slide, please. And I want to thank Steve for doing this with us for the past year. It's been a great relationship. And he was one of the founding members of Reston for a Lifetime, so he's no stranger to what we're about or what we're doing. And I also want to thank very much our two sponsors, Hunters Woods at Trail's Edge and Residents at Colvin Run. They both offer assisted living and memory care in our area. And they've made this webinar series a reality for us. Next slide, please. So let me introduce our speaker, speaker number 4 for us this year. Gary Barg and I have known each other for many, many years. We used to go to conferences in National Council on Aging and American Society on Aging for years and years and years. And many broke bread together several times. And I've always been an admirer of Gary's because he's stayed on mission for so many years, since the 1990s, in trying to educate and inform people about caregiving all across this country through his magazine and through his website and through his Fearless Caregiver Conferences. I'm sure he'll talk a little bit about that later. But I'm glad he's here today, and he's going to share some thoughts and get you thinking, and I hope you have some questions and that challenge him. But anyway, take it away, Gary.
Am I here?
Yep, you're here. You look good. You sound good, Gary.
Oh, okay, because I can't see myself. It's a pleasure meeting you, Steve, and it's just wonderful to see you again, Scott. The only problem with your introduction is it wasn't many, many, many years. It was many, 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 many years. Other than that, we're doing great. I have always found that I've been able to be in what I call a stream of good folks from the 90s to the early 2000s when I met Scott, to even now when there are new advocates coming into the caregiving space, as it were. And all I see is heart and commitment and dedication. And as I used to say, there are few of us in those days who are going, the caregivers are coming, the caregivers are coming. And now we all know that we're here We all know the value proposition of being a family caregiver, and now we're all trying to find ways to support family caregivers as much as we possibly can. And according to, I guess, my all-time favorite caregiver advocate, who we unfortunately lost a few weeks ago, former First Lady Rosalind Carter, in her book, Helping Yourself, Help Others, she said that the most penultimate thing that can be said about family caregiving. There are only 4 kinds of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. And I think truer words have never been spoken. I've been blessed to interview her a handful of times for different covers of today's Caregiver magazine, and to spend time with her in Americas at her gala. Excuse me, I gotta put the boss down.
Yeah.
My name is Gary, and I am a caregiver, primarily above anything else. I would also say I'm a serial caregiver. I'm also the author of the books, The Fearless Caregiver, Caregiving Ties That Bind, and You Are Not Alone. I'm founder and editor-in-chief of today's Caregiver magazine and caregiver.com, which both celebrate 28 years this year. And in February, we'll be hosting our 311th Fearless Caregiver Conference that we've held around the nation, so far in 47 cities and 26 states. And people say, well, why don't you just have everyone come to you? You know, there's a national caregiver conference. And I always say that the challenge is, I don't want caregivers to laugh at me, say that they're able to take 3 days away to come do something as important for themselves, but as challenging for the care that they give their loved ones as being 4 or 5 states away. So we go to them. The other reason is, I truly believe that all caregiving is national in implication. You need to know what's going on national and state. You need to know what's going on in Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security in Washington and your state capitals with regards to support for family caregivers, financing, and education. But it's also local in application. If I sit here and we're in Florida and you come down from Reston for a conference, and I introduce you to a wonderful elder care attorney who's not licensed in Virginia, I haven't really done much. So we go to you, and it's also a blessing. It's probably the greatest blessing I've ever had, is to find myself in rooms of true caregiving heroes. Heroes in this world is family caregivers. I know when you say that to caregiver, they go, ah. And I say, okay, then let me say it. Because everything you do for your loved one and for your family and your friends and your community, even if they don't understand it or respect it yet, is the most important job that anybody will ever have. And even though we're speaking through a computer screen, getting a bit of Zoom poisoning, I'm thrilled to be spending time with you today. Scott Parkin, as I said, and I have been friends for longer than either one of us want to admit. But one day when you see him, take him aside and ask him about the time we spent with ZZ Top in San Francisco. Big deal. I started my personal journey as a family caregiver 33 years ago, as I helped my mom care for my dad, who retired in 1990 at the age of 59, and within 3 months was diagnosed with bone marrow cancer. Mom went from business partner, traveling partner, love of life for 50 years, and spouse, to being a full-time caregiver as his condition worsened and everything that goes along with being a caregiver. He passed away a year and a half later, and immediately afterwards, Mom became caregiver for her parents, who were dealing with, respectively, cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, strokes, mobility issues. You know, the doctors loved them, the insurance companies, not so much. At the time, I was living in Atlanta, Georgia, getting set up to do work in video for the '96 Olympics. Shows you how long ago this was. And I spoke with her on the phone every week. She never asked me to return home. She would be aghast if she thought I was going to return home to South Florida, where all my family lives and where I am now. But I knew by the distress in her voice during one particular conversation, in August of 1994 that I had to do something, and I had to do something fast. My mom had been primary caregiver first for dad, then after he passed for my grandparents. And during those years, what I would do, my brother lived in New Orleans. I lived in Atlanta. My sister lived down the street from mom and dad, but had two little babies. And between us, my brother and I would come in once every 6 weeks. Somebody would be there for a weekend. The challenge is you don't know nothing. When you're a family member coming in for 2 or 3 days, do what I can, help mom, make decisions, hug her, and leave. I like to say that a lot of times caregivers are a sneaky lot, because mom would pull everyone together for those 2 days to make everything look as rosy as it could. So she didn't want us to suffer when we came in for those 2 days to help her during those the once a month, once every 6 weeks. So this time I had 2 weeks to come in before I had some projects that I had to start. I came to South Florida, and for these 2 weeks, immediately, I found myself racing around with mom to doctor's offices, arguing with the insurance companies, arguing with, family members, in and out of hospital waiting rooms at 3 o'clock in the morning. And it was the most challenging 2 weeks in my life as a human being that I could ever have thought of having. And I remember sitting with mom at her dining room table the night before I was leaving to go back to Atlanta. And I said, boy, mom, am I glad I was able to come in these 2 weeks, because look what we went through. And I recounted all the horrors we went through, sleepless nights and life and death decisions, and racing around town, and, just all the challenges we faced. And she looked at me dumbfounded, because what was to me the worst, most painful, most horrible 2 weeks in my life at that point was just a normal 2 weeks in the life of a family caregiver. She didn't know what I was talking about. So I went back to Atlanta, gathered my belongings, and moved back to Miami to become what I like to call a caregiver's caregiver, dedicating to helping her as she helped our loved ones, but never taking her power away from her and saying, okay, mom, I'm doing it for you now. The upside was I quickly realized we weren't alone, and not by a long shot. We would find plenty of other people like us rushing around trying to do the best for the loved ones with little or no information, but always enough time to share whatever piece of information, whatever piece of the puzzle we've learned with our fellow family caregivers. And that's what I like to say to family caregivers. Every time you're in a room with at least one other family caregiver, you're in a room with another expert in caregiving, because they figured something out caring for their loved one. They're the CEO of caring for their loved one. And they figured something out that dovetails with what you need to care for your loved one, and you'll never know if you don't ask. So that's why I always say, when you're with a family caregiver, it's 3 a.m. You're in the hospital waiting room, the doctor's seeing your loved one. It's cold, the seats are hard, newspapers are old, and you see a caregiver sitting 5 seats down from you. I don't want to bother them. It's not a bother. It's a meeting of experts. Reach out to them, find out what gets them through the day, help them see what gets you through the day. I got more advice, more support, more information, more wisdom from family caregivers I met coming in and out of long-term care facilities, trying to figure out what to do with my grandfather, whose condition was changing, or hospital waiting rooms, or wherever we were. And that's what we like to do with the Fearless Caregiver Conferences. We've been blessed to be in Virginia twice already, in Williamsburg and Lynchburg. Haven't been in Reston yet, Scott. No big deal, but and we love it, because for me, it's being in a room with CEOs of Caring for the Loved One, Inc. And the idea is we don't PowerPoint, we don't pontificate, we don't speechify. We just want to bring experts to the table and have them share their wisdom with their fellow experts, being the family caregivers. And I love the moments at these conferences where, and it's not done on purpose, but there's always a moment I call Stump the Panel. We have a panel of experts, hundreds of years of combined experience, doctor, lawyer, caregiver coordinator, VA caregiver coordinator, just really incredible folks on the panel. And a caregiver raises their hand, asks a question, and everybody pauses for a second. It always happens. In that pause, 5 or 6 or 7 other family caregivers raise their hand and say, here's what I did. My best example of that is on our Facebook page, our Fearless Caregiver Facebook page. And it's about 15 years ago in Nashville, a young man, guess not so young anymore, stood up and said, my mom's tough. I don't know what to do. She wants to drive. I can't get her to drive. So I just let her drive from our house down the street to the store and back. And I said, well, is there a school in the between the house and the store? Are there, walkways? Oh, yeah. Yeah. I said, well, I have an elder care attorney on the panel, and I have a caregiver coordinator from the Area Agency on Aging on the panel. And as I walked to the front of the room, I was stopped by 7, 8, 9 family caregivers who said, well, here's what I did, distributor cap, or jump in the car with mom, or, the car disappeared, or whatever it was that worked for their family. There was some connection that worked for him. I went up to the front of the room. I talked to the elder care attorney, who said, the thing is, God forbid somebody gets hurt or worse because your mom shouldn't have been driving. And they hire an attorney who can figure out easily that you should have known, even if you didn't know, you should have known. They'll take your house. And this young man stood up, walked out of the room, called the Tennessee Department of Transportation, and dealt with that moment. And there was nobody in the world who was able to tell him that information other than his fellow experts, the family caregivers. So we've been endeavoring to support and advise family caregivers since the first issue of Today's Caregiver magazine rolled off the presses in 1995. And many incredible things have happened for caregivers over the past 20 years since we launched Today's Caregiver and caregiver.com. We've entered the social media society in a big way. You can join us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Zoom events, sign up for our weekly online newsletters, or visit our YouTube Fearless Caregiver channel. All of it through our home care on our homepage on caregiver.com. I still want to know whatever happened to mimeograph, because at my age, if it doesn't smell like anything, it's not a communication vehicle. And everybody under 40 is going, Mimi, or what? Allow me to share some challenging statistics for family caregivers. Did you know the average caregiver will be responsible for the directed expenditure of $40,000 a year caring for our loved ones, and $47,000 a year of directed expenditure if it's Alzheimer's or cognitive challenges? We'll lose over $600,000 in opportunities and promotions during the lifetime of our career. Over 63% of caregivers consider depression to be our most commonly felt emotion, and many as many as 3/4 of heavy-duty caregivers, especially spousal caregivers, are going it alone with absolutely no support from other family members. And that family caregivers provide the overwhelming majority of support for home care in the US, which is about 96%. Then why do we do it? Because we can't not do it. Because our loved ones need us. Because we never even asked if there was any other way. And it's because it's who we are. So now what? How do we go from being a dedicated daughter, son, or spouse to being a dietitian, therapist, insurance specialist, immediate medical expert, chauffeur, psychologist, pharmacist, and incontinence specialist? And keep our relationship with our loved ones, families, and friends and neighbors, not to mention our jobs, which 1/3 of us end up outright losing. I firmly believe that the way that caregivers achieve all our goals as family caregivers is to actually take on a new job role. That is, of course, being the CEO of Caring for Your Loved One, Inc., but it's also being a fearless caregiver. A fearless caregiver is a caregiver who understands they have a job to do as a full and equal member of their loved one's care team. And I say the manager of the team. No less important than the case manager, the therapist, and yeah, even the doctor. Everyone has important jobs to do, and the family caregivers is to learn all they can about their loved one's situation and act as their advocate, put a human face to their loved one within a system which can not be the easiest place in the world for people with loved ones with healthcare challenges. This is a crucial role because no matter how much they care, doctors see as many as 25, 35, 40 patients a day, and case managers and therapists have larger caseloads than ever. And in fact, when my grandfather did go into a long-term care facility, one of the first meetings my mom and I had with the team, they said, come anytime. We have team meetings at Tuesday at 2:00, whatever. And we'd like to hear your opinion on things. Well, I love that. So we went. They were surprised because most people don't take them up on it. Well, the challenge is a lot of the people who care for your loved ones directly in hospital settings and in facility settings never lay eyes on your loved ones. They might be the dietitian. They might be some other members of the team who are important to your loved one's care, but they don't know anything about them. So I want them to know that my loved one is Joe Weiss, who is a magnificent painter of watercolors, like Scott, was president of the Miami Art League, loved life, loved people, not just patient in bed, 201 window. And that makes all the difference in the world. Over the years, I've spoken with thousands of other caregivers, and honestly, one thing has become crystal clear. A caregiver can be heard in today's healthcare system, and we can be listened to, and we can be respected. But there are significant common traits we found among caregivers who are being heard, listened to, and respected. First, you have to believe you can make a difference. Without that, we have nothing. Second, we see our role in our loved one's care as being just as important, and I say a lot of times more important, than any other professional caregiver on their team. And third, you ask questions. You ask lots of questions. You research, and you don't take an easy no for an answer. Don't be afraid that if you ask a question, people won't care for your loved one as much as well as they should. They will care for them more because they know you're on the job. You know what you're doing. I always say there's two sets of 3 words that every caregiver needs to know. One is when our loved ones are challenging, and they can be challenging, and especially when they're cognitive challenges, might be sundowning. Stop, instead of getting mad, look them deep in the eyes, put their face in your hands, and say, I love you. Just from your heart, I love you. This is why you're doing it. I love you. Because the last thing anybody lets go of is who loves them, who's there for them, and who respects them. I remember when my grandfather was in the long-term care facility, and I'd be holding his hand and stroking his hair, facing the wall, he would go like this. And I knew exactly what happened. My mom had walked in the door by the foot of his bed. I didn't even see his eyes open. He knew she was there. He knew she was always there for them and for him, and he knew she was the center of his universe. The other set of 3 words you don't say with your loved one, but you say anytime you're getting stonewalled by the system, anytime you're on the phone with the insurance company and they're not really answering your questions, anytime you're not getting the support you need from people in the hospital or long-term care facility, who's your supervisor? Never stop asking that question. That's probably the most important question you'll be able to ask to maintain your role as the head of your loved one's care team. A fearless caregiver is one who asks questions their doctor and does not rest until they receive clear and concise answers. A fearless caregiver knows her rights. By the way, speaking of the doctor, now with the phones, it's easy to do, but I've had many doctors on many panels in many cities, and they all agree. There's no shame in recording what the doctor says, because a lot of times she'll say, well, you know, and talk what seems to be Greek, and you're driving away, you're going, what was that? But you're afraid to stop them. You're afraid to ask. But if you put your phone down, if you put a tape recorder down in front of them, I have never heard a doctor speak more slow and clear and concise. It just really focuses the fact that you need this information. A fearless caregiver knows the rights concerning their loved ones' insurance plans and is able to exercise those rights. A lot of times you'll call these phone numbers and you'll know more than they do. That's where who's your supervisor comes in. A fearless caregiver is one who knows how to find the latest treatment options and present qualified research to the members of his or her loved one's care team. And I mean qualified research, especially with clinical trials. Not that your brother, sisters, garbage men's, aunts, cousin thought that green tea would be good. Your role as an equal professional is to bring them information that's qualified. And I've never seen, I think I saw a study that said 87% of doctors will listen to a caregiver when they bring them appropriate information. A fearless caregiver is a member of their loved one's care team. You are a member. You are the lead of that team. But the most important thing a caregiver do for the loved one is to learn to care for themselves. Unfortunately, when I say this, many caregivers' reactions are, what care for me? I don't have time for care for me. I'm spending 36 hours a day caring for them. I have my kids. I have everything else I need to do. I don't have any time to care for me. And every time I hear that, I just ask the caregiver to tell me who the person is who will step in and care for the loved one and them when they fall apart. Who's that person who's going to care for both of you? Or God forbid you're not there in the situation anymore. I have not heard anybody give me a solid answer. And this is so very important because according to a Stanford University study about 20 years ago, actually, 40% of people with loved ones living with cognitive challenges will die before the loved ones they care for do. That's the bad news. The relative good news is, for one reason and one reason only, not that you catch anything, stress, unmitigated, unrelenting stress. So if we can find ways to help you deal with the stress of caregiving, we can find ways to bring that 40% number down dramatically. We as caregivers have to learn all we can about the disease or illness a loved one's battling. In this case, knowledge is truly power. But we must also learn about our role as a family caregiver. I know, Scott, am I running out of time?
I think you're good.
Good.
Yeah, keep on going.
Okay, because I can, when it comes to caregiving,
Well, we do
be here all day.
we do have if you want to address take a little break and address a question here, would you like to do that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so Noel says, why is it almost impossible to get a social worker to come to my home for approximately 1.5 hours to do an assessment? Why does the fact that I can think clearly, even though my husband has dementia, disqualify us from having an assessment?
I think and I don't know if it's a VA social worker. I don't know if this is a general social worker, but I think that's where who's your supervisor comes in. If you can't get them to do what you want them to do, and especially if it's a private company, there's another private company that will do it. And I think it's really important to us to know our rights as well as our responsibilities. So if you're not getting the social worker to come, and it's through an agency, through an organization, Montgomery County in particular, then you reach out to the person who employed them and the person who employed them, and you keep going, and you will get that social worker.
Yeah, and then also, Noel, thanks for sharing that in the chat. And if anybody in the audience has any solutions or ideas, definitely share those. And great reminder, Gary. It's so easy for us to give up when we're in an environment that we're not used to being in, and none of us are used to being in this world of elder care, and it's completely wacky, even to those of us that have been in it for decades.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And Robin has a question about the Fearless Caregiver Conference. For and who can benefit by attending? Like what is the focus of the conference?
It's for and about the caregiver. I always say that this is a day that's rare for a family caregiver because it's about you. It's for you and about you, not necessarily about, caring for your loved one. You'll have questions to ask, obviously, of the experts, but it's about you to make sure you realize you're not alone. You
Yeah.
make sure you realize that there are people in your community who are going through what you're going through. That's a sweet spot for me of the Fearless Caregiver Conferences, when caregivers answer each other's questions. I have a short story about that. We did an event in Philly and had the amazing Della Reese with us, and she was wonderful. And a caregiver stood up, and I walked over with the mic. She said, I'm here because I know I need to be here. My mom is getting set up to go to surgery, but I knew that I had to be in this. I knew that I wasn't alone, and I knew that there was support for me. And so I never would have done this before, but I came to this event, and before I go to the hospital. And as she was talking about her health system. She turns out that she cares for her mom, but then other people in need in the community. And she's had health challenges, she's had cardiac challenges, but she didn't hear herself talk about herself, just about the people she cared for. And from way across the room, a caregiver raised her hand and said, I know the community you live in. I know the neighborhood. I'm in one of those apartments. I'm going to help you. We're going to do this together. And the next year, we had the event on the main line, and the two of them were sitting together, and they regaled us with all the stuff that they were doing for their community together. And if they didn't realize that there were other people going through what they're going through, God knows what would happen to this caregiver. So it's for caregivers. It's an ability to have a day away, but also to learn about your role and maybe to care for yourself a little better.
Yeah, and I shared up on the screen. If you go to today's caregiver at the top, it says Fearless Caregivers Conference, and then Gary is going to update this. But for those in the Mid-Atlantic, he's going to have one in March in Pittsburgh. So definitely check that out.
That'll be our first Pittsburgh event. I'm really, really excited about that.
Cool. Okay, let's see. Paula has her hand raised. Sometimes this is a mistake, but Paula, if you had a question that you wanted to ask or a comment that you wanted to share, I've unmuted I've unmuted your mic, and so you should be able to open that up. But let's see. Okay, while we're waiting to see if you had some additional things that you wanted to add, Gary, feel free to just keep on going. And if we get Paula here with a question, we'll definitely address that.
All right. Well,
Gary, I have a question.
Yeah.
You've talked about the costs, not just to people and the fearless caregiver, or just a caregiver who isn't fearless. There's a tremendous personal cost, but there's a financial cost, and there have been discussions for a long time about some kind of a public program that would support caregivers, family caregivers, not just the people who are paid to do so.
Right.
What is your thinking about that?
I think it's fabulous. We do a program the next few weeks called Holiday Board of Directors Meetings. And that's e-blast that we do on different topics. And one of them is going to be just on this. We've had a group come around with us, and we're looking forward to them coming around again. They were in Williamsburg, called PPL. And their job is to manage these programs through Medicaid. And so if you're on Medicaid in particular, I don't know the specifics, you can get paid, you can get instruction, you get support, and you could get paid to be able to support your loved one. It's not going to get you that Rolls Royce you're looking for, but it'll help because of the amount of time we put in as caregivers and the amount it costs us and the financial challenges. It's called self-determination. And through the Area Agency on Aging, through Medicaid, I know there are different companies doing this. That we used to have back in the day. It was cash and counseling.
Right.
Some states were doing this, but now it's really come to a place they call self-determination. And definitely look it up, because if there's an ability to get paid, get the support, get the training, God bless us. Let's do it.
Great. Let's see. Rosalind asks, do you address caregivers who are their own caregiver? And Gary, one of the most popular topics of discussion on this platform is the topic of solo aging.
Yeah.
And we get questions like this on a regular basis of folks that are really concerned that they don't have anybody that is there.
No question. And that's getting more challenging as time goes on. That's why I like to connect the caregivers with the systems in their community. Solo aging, self caregiving. We have everybody come. And what I love is I always say we drop the silos, where you might be there with folks whose primary issue is autism and aging. You might be there with folks whose primary issue is Parkinson's. You might be, and yours is Alzheimer's. But when you drop the silos, you learn that every different group has a piece of the puzzle that the other groups need. They do things differently, and there are lessons to be learned. So yeah, absolutely, unequivocally, if you're caring for yourself, we want to care for you as well.
Cool. Now, I'm jumping back to Noelle, who had the thread about the earlier, but couldn't get a caseworker when I came home from a separate emergency room stays because of high blood pressure. So if anybody has some resources, definitely share those with Noelle. But I think just it's tough, but sticking with it. And as Gary had mentioned, try not to take no as an answer. So
I say no is just on backwards. Just gotta be on. When my mom was now that we're caring for Mom, who had a stroke, when she first had her stroke and they took her to the hospital and she was in there for a week and she was living independently, and they didn't tell us that they were going to put her in the ambulance and take her back to her apartment, and nobody knew what to do with her. I actually ended up talking to the president of the hospital. Not that I am anybody. It's just that I wasn't going to take no for an answer. And he handled it. So there's nobody you should be afraid of talking to, getting the thing you need for your loved one. Calm and collective, and as a fellow professional, because it makes a big difference, I think.
Gary, if I was a new caregiver and I'm not yet fearless, where would I go? Because I know you have a magazine, you have a website, but and there are local resources I might be able to find through Rested for a Lifetime. But are there other national organizations, big nonprofits, for example, where people should go when they're in their search at the very beginning?
Sure. Obviously, we know a bunch of them. Caregiver.org out in California. Used to be the National Family Caregivers Association is now CAN, Caregiver Action Network. By the way, if you have kids in your family who are,
we know a bunch of them.
What's that?
Sorry, that was my fault. Something went on my computer. Don't worry about it.
Oh, no problem. Because you're right, there are a bunch of them. But there's a wonderful friend of mine here in South Florida who started the American Association of Caregiving Youth. 5 million, 7 million kids in this family are being primary caregivers, and they need support, and they need to know they're not alone, and they need advice. So for every particular kind of care. I guess my best advice is to reach out to your local area agency on aging, ADRC, whoever that is in your community, call their senior helpline, and then talk to them. Because I always say that if they don't have the answer, they'll know who has the answer, or they'll find the answer. And so you just need to hook into the system in your community. And I don't care if it's a rural, urban, New York City, there are, right. Google your area agency. Every state has one. And by the way, there's 640 area agency on aging organizations. They call themselves different things for some reason, Alliance for Aging here in Miami. But the idea is you don't have to do it alone. And there are people who have walked the walk in front of you, and there are people who walk the walk beside you. When I first came back down to South Florida and was caring for my grandfather, his Alzheimer's was getting pretty bad, I walked into the Alzheimer's Association office on Brickell Avenue, on Biscayne Boulevard, and sat down with a social worker and just bawled. And they walked me through the system of what I needed to know, introduced me to people, introduced me to organizations, got me in a support group, and they're still a friend to this day. So that's the challenge. That's the worst part of caregiving. We all think we're absolutely alone, but there's 77.6 million people in this country going through this. We're not alone, and there are people looking for you. So you have to do what you can to reach out. That's one reason we love going to the different communities, because we can put caregivers together with the people there to support them.
Yeah, and then Pam is on our streaming, listening to streaming on LinkedIn, and she reminded, whenever we have a discussion about walking the road alone, I like to remind people of the two professions, aging life care managers and the growing profession of patient advocates, because they can oftentimes be a great resource for people.
But if you don't know. I mean, when your kid goes to college, there are books, there are trainers, there are guides. When you're going to have a baby, there are books, there are trainers and guides. Now you get that metaphorical phone call in the middle of the night. Dad fell, your wife's found wandering, there's been an accident. Your head is spinning for the first 6 months. And that's when we need to be there for you, and more than anything else, because so many of the proper and improper decisions are being made. So the idea is that in Philly another year, a young lady came to the event. I said, "Oh, who are you caring for?" She said, "Nobody yet, but I know it's coming." And I said, "This is for you."
Yeah, that's that I wish everybody would take that attitude. That's a very rare attitude for folks to take. Most people, I'm not ready for that yet. Let's see. Now, somebody asked, so is this PPL organization providing caregivers information on all states nationwide? Okay. I think they're referring to your organization.
No, we're not PPL. I just mentioned them because they've been on our panel at the conferences to talk about self-directed care, meaning, that they work with Medicaid, I don't know about Medicare, to create a professionalism for you, including getting paid. But it's self-determination, because there are other companies doing this. I mentioned them because
okay. You know what? And I'm a big fan of public partnerships. Sorry, that slipped my mind. We've had them on the discussions as well, but I'm dropping their info in chat as well. And if I can, I will pull up the discussion that we had with them this year. That is a great unknown funding resource for a lot of people, the Medicaid waivers and at home that they help organize.
And you'd never know. I didn't know until I heard them at the panel. And
exactly. I'm in the same boat. The guilty is charged as well. All right. Well, shoot, this has been really, we got some great resources that people are dropping in. Okay, so here's another question from Paro. My situation, I'm willing to, and perhaps already a full-time caregiver since 5 years for my ailing father, who's got Alzheimer's and a stroke. And now mother who just had a surgery. I'm fulfilling this responsibility, but sometimes professional ends get compromised. How do I strike a balance? Come to learn from the masters here. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to drop this into chat so everybody can kind of can read it, and maybe some folks in the audience have a solution. But any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is work-life balance, and it's tough. It's tough for me. I mean, when mom first had her stroke, my brother and I would shift nights. One was staying with her and my sister. It was during COVID, and my sister lived in the same apartment building, so she was able to be with her during the day, and it was exhausting. And then we had work to do. I had to get on the road, do what I need to do. It is not, and I'm not here Pollyanna saying, oh, it's going to be great, just learn. It's tough. No matter how easy you make it on yourself, it's tough. We did come up with something, if you don't mind, we call the Fearless Caregiver Manifesto. And I think one of the answers is one of the manifesto pieces for this gentleman. I always say, just as the doctors have their Hippocratic Oath, the social workers have their Code of Ethics, and nurses have their Florence Nightingale Pledge, we're going to be equal members of this care team. We need our own Code of Ethics to work through, and we call it the Fearless Caregiver Manifesto. So let me just run through the very first one, because I think this is an answer for this gentleman. I will fearlessly seek out other caregivers or care organizations and join an appropriate support group. I realize there's strength in numbers and will not isolate myself from those who are also caring for their loved ones. And I know that for anybody who counsels family caregivers, it's important to understand that so many of us as caregivers, last thing we want to do is sit in a support group. Well, I'm going to sit in that place where everyone's whining and I have my own problems and my head will just explode out. I always say to anybody who counsels family caregivers, ask them to take a leap of faith. Go 3 times to an appropriate, well-led, community-based support group. And the first time, yeah, you're going to feel like you parachuted into a raucous, bickering holiday meal during Christmas in Peoria. You don't know the people, you know the place, you know what they're talking about. Everyone's screaming. If you run away then, you've lost. The second time you go to this group, now you're starting to hear them tell your story. Oh, that's a situation I have. Oh, I didn't know the answer to that. Oh, I've never seen a caregiver go to an appropriate, well-led support group 3 times and not pick up the phone, call everybody, tell them how wonderful this support group, this whole thing they've just discovered. In fact, at our event in LA a bunch of years ago, we gave an award, Fearless Caregiver Award, to local community caregiver. And I just done my conversation on support groups. And she came up on the stage and she said, I want to back up what he said about support groups. You see that table down there of 10 people I'm sitting with? That's my support group. They came to be with me, to honor me as I got this award. Her entire support group took the day off from work just to be with her. Okay, one more quick word on support groups. As I mentioned before, my dad retired in 1990 after developing bone marrow cancer at the age of 59. And although he was a gregarious guy and loved people, remembered everything about a person that he met 20 years earlier, people adored him, he was still a tough old Marine. And to go to a support group, oh, forget it. He broke 4 psychiatrists. I think they all run hot dog stands in New York now. He broke them. He wasn't going to deal with this stuff. And so I was, I was in Atlanta and he was in Florida, and I'd be on the phone with him as much as I could and try to communicate. But there are things, he was dealing with bone marrow cancer. There were things he didn't want to share. There are things he wasn't interested in involving us in because they were too terrible. And I understood that. I did what I could. Very quickly, this is the early 90s, and I'm sitting in my house, and I'm watching Tom Brokaw. I won't do a Tom Brokaw accent because I can't do it, but watching Tom Brokaw at the end of his newscast. He always had a 5-minute piece. So I learned about the internet. Always have interesting 5-minute pieces, and he did a 5-minute piece on some study that just came out that said how important it was for people living with cancer to go to support groups. And they did B-roll, which is the video they cut away to just to emphasize what Brokaw was saying. And there was a support group that was held in a church down the street from my dad's house. And there he was holding court. And in 5 seconds, that was the video that they wanted to emphasize how important support groups are. And I saw him lift his cane and put it down and laugh uproarious 5 seconds. That was everything. I called him. I said, Tom Brokaw had to tell me you're going to a support group? That was his family of choice. And for caregivers, it could be your family of choice. It could be the place that you could share and learn and get pieces of the puzzle. And I will tell you something, he passed about 6 months later, and everybody from that support group who was physically able to be by his graveside was there. Anyway, that's my soapbox on support groups.
Oh, that's great. And I'm looking at the clock, and I see that we're getting close to the top of the hour. And Scott, if you want to join on screen, let's we got one more question here. And whenever I say one more question, a few more will come in. But and this is how to handle the problem of male-female inequality with banks, credit cards, accounts, etc. Even with both names on the account, it always seems like they recognize the male over the female. And I've heard, comments like this. It's hard to believe that in this day and age of equity that you still have things like this going on, but I'm sure that they do.
Oh, everything you could think of that goes on, goes on. And a lot of times I always say, when I created the Fearless Caregiver book, the first iteration of it, I wanted to call it You Can Fire Your Doctor and 250 other interesting things to do as a fearless caregiver, but the publisher wasn't going to have it. So a lot of times you just maybe that's not the place for you to be. That bank's not the bank for you to be in. But the number one thing I'd like to say is when you're dealing with issues like this and you know it's coming up, and especially before your loved one may lose the ability to make their own decisions, get thee to a well-renowned elder care or trust and wills attorney, not your brother-in-law's cousin who's a real estate attorney. Get to it's worth every dime to do this correctly up front and let them know your concerns and get the paperwork in place. The other thing I'd heard that you don't want to put all this, the important documents in the safe deposit box, because if you need them quickly and the person passes, it may take time to get that material out. But number one, don't do it on your own. It's so very important to make sure that you have the proper NEALA. Wonderful. Yeah, that's great. Go to NEALA and find out who the best attorney, within your price range. There's also, I know there was in Williamsburg, nonprofit groups that support elder care attorneys. We have them, the Elder Law Society in Palm Beach County. We have that too. So you may not have to pay through the nose for it, but you need to do this before you make financial decision number one.
No.
Hey, Gary, thank you. You've really covered a lot of territory, and it's what I expected. And I thank you very much. And I thank Steve for monitoring this and making this happen. Just for those who are on the call who are residents of Reston, take a look at restonforalifetime.org. We have a caregiving section. It's a great place to start and build on what you heard today. If you have issues, and Gary covered a lot of issues that fearless caregivers face. That's hard to say for some reason. But anyway,
don't worry, because sometimes I say careless caregivers. So
exactly. And for you and for everybody on the call, happy holidays, and thank you for joining us.
And well, one last question. This is related to your conference. This woman says, or this person says, I've been a CNA for 15 years and an upcoming caregiver to my aging parent. Man, talk about real life training. I also work for a nurse registry. Can I attend the conference? I think it would be beneficial for my personal life and my job. So do you sometimes get professional caregivers and
we want the room to be mixed. We want to make sure that the professionals are there, the families are there, the organizations are there, so the conversation is three-dimensional. I do want to say one of the things that happens at these events is I get wonderful articles for my newsletters from what the caregivers share. So we do 2 free weekly newsletters on caregiver.com. And if you'd like to learn about what we're learning about, please sign up.
Awesome. This was a great discussion. I can see by the comments, folks got a lot out of it. All right, folks. Well, we'll see you. We got a few more of these next week, but everybody have a happy holidays. And it's great having both being here with you, Scott, and you, Gary, as well.
Thank you, Steve. Great to be with you.